People who say taxation is theft. How else do you props the government gets the funds for roads, military, education, etc.? My problem has less to do with the taxes and more to do with where that money actually goes. Edit. Grammar. They expect private companies to handle all that, for a charge of course. No one answering the question. The actual answer, I believe, BC am not one of those people, is that most public works are better off done by the rich who will have the means to fund it and more importantly profit off it. Say making new roads. Government does it because that's what they should do. However, the argument is because they have no profit incentives they'll do it slow. Half a said whatever. A true libertarian utopia would have rich guy A make a new road better than rich guy B, so everyone will drive on highway A and pay highway as tolls over highway B. Again, I don't actually believe this, but felt you deserved an actual answer over diatribes. I feel like most people wouldn't have a problem if the money wasn't so poorly managed. When billions of dollars just get lost and the government says whoops. Oh well lol, when money is going to wars people don't support. If people had a more direct say in how the money is used, it wouldn't be an issue. I mean, if you see the incredible amount of potholes, homeless, trash in the street, and how poorly any public service runs, the question is how are they spending it? Or rather, who is pocketing it? That is where the alleged theft steps from fundamentally. I don't have a problem with the idea of taxes, I have a problem with the reality of giving away about 5,060 of all my work to an entity that hasn't fixed the same roads that have been complete shite for the last 20 years, and forces our local teachers to buy their own school supplies. I can tolerate a high tax. I can tolerate a tax collector that doesn't do anything meaningful with the funds it collects. I can't tolerate both at the same time. I'm not representing my own personal views here. I'm explaining why OP's question is coming from a misunderstanding of the original argument that taxation is theft. Their whole point is that the government shouldn't collect funds for insert governmental function here against the will of the taxis. The theft claimers didn't consent to pay taxes, yet if they don't, the govt will attempt to coerce them into paying taxes in ever-escalating steps until eventually they send some nice young men with guns to insert government-imposed consequence. Hear them. Taking a person's belongings from them against their will, especially with the threat of forced imprisonment, is theft by definition. Theft for a good cause that benefits us all, like roads or hospitals or schools, is still theft. What the money is taken without consent for, and who's doing the taxing without consent, is irrelevant to whether or not that process is theft. Asking how the government would function if not by taxation is missing the point of the claim that taxation is theft. These folks don't want the government to function if it requires coercion to do so, or at least they will complain about it if it does. It's bold of you to assume these people have ever thought about where government funds come from. It's not so much that people don't want to pay taxes. It's more that governments are very inefficient, corrupt, and careless with how the money is used. When you have nobody to answer to and a limitless supply of income always coming in, it's very easy to do a shitty job. It's not that all taxation is theft. But when your land, food, paycheck, gas, etc. is all taxed, it gets to a point where it's theft. I'd be fine with just sales tax or just income tax. But fucking everything is taxed, and for what? So we can drone strike people in tents 2,000 miles away? So we can supply a government with weapons to carry out a genocide? So we can bail out banks and oil companies? At the very fucking least, give us universal healthcare. But no, we never have the money for that. Always have money for war though. I'm not a taxation is theft believer, but I understand their positions. Some simply make an exception for a minimal military, viewing it as one of the only proper functions of the state. Others believe that the country should be defended by the citizens, not by a centralized military. Everyone should have a gun and be trained to use it. In the modern era, that would extend to military equipment like artillery and fighter planes, although it's generally assumed that the makers of such things wouldn't sell them to just anyone to protect their reputation. The military could be much smaller because it's only expected to repel an invasion, not to be deployed overseas. The Afghans and Vietnamese repelled the Russians and Americans with almost no technology or money at all, so it's reasonable to assume that any reasonably prosperous country could easily deter all potential invaders. This is how the founders of America expected it to defend itself. It's also how Switzerland's military works. Etc. first recorded 110,050, late Old English, from Latin et cetera, equivalent to et and cetera, accusative neuter plural of ceteris, the rest of, the remainder. Robin Hood didn't steal from the rich to give to the poor, he stole from the government. You got a bunch of rich blokes sitting on their fucking dragon hoard, why don't we munch on them for a change? In a perfect world, tax money would go to where it's meant to go. But who will build the roads? It takes 2 minutes to Google and find the key points on both sides of the argument without relying on Reddit's playground politics for worthwhile information. Problem is here, our taxes are not using the funds as best they could be. Private citizens and companies have taken to fixing the roads here. There are public schools still with pit toilets here. Half the time there's no water or electricity. There's barely any roadside maintenance happening. Barely any improvements. Why? Because our government is too busy being corrupt and spending our 200k on a mop, our 20m on a sports facility which is unused because it's been so shoddily done, our 40m on a fence which is basically just barbed wire that fell apart almost immediately. That's why we have a problem paying tax. Taxation is theft comes from the very people defending billionaires. It's a smooth brain operation. By saying that taxation is theft, I am not saying that it should not be done. It is a necessary evil, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't call it anything else. Yes, we have to pay for roads, military, and more. But the people taking and spending the money have an obligation to use it responsibly. And they do not. Remembering that it is not taken voluntarily is a necessary part of executing that obligation. Patriotism in a government of the people means every individual having their pitchfork pointed downward in peace, but having that pitchfork always at the ready. It's the amount of taxes I pay. As in, federal, state, city, etc. I work and earn a paycheck taxed, I buy something with that already taxed money sales tax at the end of the year. Because I own the item I paid taxes on to buy with already taxed money property tax, so I sell the thing I paid taxes on for owning, after paying taxes for buying it, with my already taxed paycheck income tax. Government should have a monopoly on drug trade and sell us meth, crack, blow, White Horse, Mary Jane, and all the others to fund their ventures. Maybe tax the workers less than the billionaires for start. Income tax is bullshit and was supposed to be a temporary tax. However, much like anything else with Gov, once they get that extra money coming in, they are not going to let that flow of cash go. But people are ignorant and keep voting to give more power to the Gov. Make core pay their fair share and none of us would need to subsidize the core lack of paid taxes in the form of income tax. There's 2 reasons. 40% of the population in the US doesn't pay income tax, so 60% of the population is subsidizing for the rest. Tax isn't always spent efficiently, fairly, or in a manner that benefits the people. For example, government overpaying vendors 100x for parts because they don't shop around, or paying taxes to fund schools when they don't have kids, etc. To answer the question itself, it's to tax everyone equally for common infrastructure everyone uses. So a flat rate tax regardless of if you make $1 million or 30k. I don't necessarily think taxation is theft. I would like more control over what the taxes get spent on. Perhaps the role for elected leaders should be primarily in execution, and instead a system that allows individuals to specifically fund what they care about would be useful. Kinda like an ETF for public goods. One last, large tax with that, fund the military and begin invading other countries. Sell the loot or allow countries to purchase immunity each year, and to answer all your questions, yes, I will be running in 2024 for president. It's pointless to ask those people questions. Their conception of the world is undeveloped and incompatible with living in a just and organized society. They think anything the government uses money on, which is exactly what they would personally approve of, is theft. They do not value the opinions of their neighbors or other citizens. They classify anyone who doesn't agree with them and share their priorities as an enemy. Not a true American, a traitor. They imagine that one of every $2 the government spends is waste. And they have absolutely no understanding of what it actually costs to run everything. They often come from small rural communities which they believe have been left behind because they can't fathom that the road that serves them and their 3 neighbors cost exponentially more to build than the 4 of them will ever pay in taxes. That they are the net beneficiary of the system, yet the clamor for tax cuts which benefit only the wealthy, which is the origin of sentiment in the first place. I live in California. We have 2 senators for our 40 million people. That's 2 of the vote, despite us making up 12 of the population and producing 15 of the GDP. For every 1 in federal tax, we get 0.65 back in federal aid. Meanwhile, states like Kentucky, Mississippi, New Mexico, whatever get 23 in federal aid for every 1 of tax. Sure feels we don't get fair representation at the federal level nor fair returns back, and thus other states voting to take our money isn't democracy, it's just theft. I have absolutely zero problem paying my state tax, where 100 of the funds is used locally to pave my state's roads and fund the schools. Like, why is this concept difficult to understand? Lottery, that was Ben Franklin's idea. The government has way more money and access to debt than me, bro. People saying they need our money for this type of shit is fucking nonsense, IMO. There's enough money for all this shit without taxing us, or at least not as heavy, but it remains in the pockets of certain people.